Hi, welcome to this channel. In this video, we are going to look at OWASP and the top 10 web application vulnerabilities. This is a useful topic for both web app pen testers and bug bounty hunters. OWASP stands for Open Web Application Security Project. It is an international organization dedicated to improving the security of software applications. OWASP provides tools and resources for engineers to help make applications more secure. One of OWASP's most important contributions is the OWASP Top 10 Vulnerabilities list. OWASP Top 10 lists the 10 most critical web application security risks. It is widely recognized as a standard for web application security. By learning the OWASP Top 10 security risks, organizations can reduce the risk of attacks against their web applications. Let's look at each of them in detail. Injection is a type of vulnerability in which an attacker injects malicious code into a web app. Injection can lead to unauthorized access to sensitive data, loss of data, or even complete system compromise. An example of an injection attack is SQL injection. This is where an attacker injects malicious SQL code into a web application's SQL query. This is usually done when inputs into the web app is not properly checked. If successful, the malicious code is executed by the database server. Another example is command injection. Here, an attacker injects malicious shell code into a web application. This can lead to devastating consequences, including a complete system takeover. To prevent injection attacks, it is important to check and sanitize all user input. Use ready-made SQL queries in the backend instead of generating SQL queries on the fly. Additionally, keep all software and libraries up to date with the latest security patches. Insufficient monitoring and logging refers to the lack of proper monitoring and logging. This can make it difficult to detect and respond to security incidents. For example, if a system does not have proper logging in place, it will be difficult to detect when an attacker tries to compromise a web application. Additionally, if the system does not have real-time monitoring, it will be difficult to detect security incidents on time. To address insufficient monitoring and logging, you should implement robust monitoring systems that capture a wide range of events. This can include logging access to sensitive data, network traffic, and system logs, as well as monitoring network devices and systems for signs of suspicious activity. Additionally, you should review and analyze log data to identify trends and potential security incidents. Broken authentication refers to weaknesses in the authentication process of a web application. This includes issues such as weak or easily guessable passwords, lack of proper password management, and using vulnerable authentication mechanisms. For example, an attacker can exploit a system that allows weak passwords by guessing common passwords. They can also use brute force tools like Hydra and other password cracking tools. Another example is the use of easily guessable security questions such as what is your mother's maiden name? These can be easily answered by an attacker who has done their basic research on the target. To prevent broken authentication, enable strong authentication mechanisms such as multi-factor authentication. Also, enforce password recycling policies that require users to change passwords periodically. Sensitive data exposure refers to the practice of storing and transmitting sensitive information. This includes passwords, credit card numbers, and personal identification numbers. Without protective methods such as encryption, this can result in the data being intercepted, stolen, or even manipulated by malicious attackers. To mitigate this risk, you should always encrypt sensitive information when stored and transmitted. This includes storing encrypted passwords instead of plain text passwords. Appropriate access control should be put in place to ensure only authorized personnel have access to sensitive data. XML external entities is a security vulnerability that affects XML processes when they parse XML input. This vulnerability allows an attacker to inject malicious XML code into an XML document. This can lead to exposure of sensitive information, denial of service, and even remote code execution. To prevent XSE attacks, applications should validate and sanitize XML input. You should also disable external entity and DTD processing by default. Additionally, use a less complex data format such as JSON whenever possible. While authentication tells us whether a user can access a system, access control tells us who can access a specific resource in the system. Broken access control is a security vulnerability that occurs when an application does not restrict access to sensitive resources. This includes files, database records, or even functionality that should be limited to select users. Broken access control can lead to unauthorized users being able to view, modify, or delete sensitive data. To reduce this risk, implement access control policies and authentication mechanisms. You can also assign access rights based on the principle of least privilege, meaning that users should only have the minimum access required to perform their job. Regular security audits and assessment will help identify and address any potential access control vulnerabilities. Security misconfiguration is a security vulnerability that arises when an application is not configured properly. This can result in exposure of sensitive data such as error messages or system information. For example, if you don't change the default settings of your backend application, it can expose the error messages to the user instead of gracefully handling it. To reduce this risk, we should configure systems according to industry best practices. We should also apply appropriate security controls and patches as needed. Additionally, we should perform regular security scans and assessments to identify and address any misconfigurations. Cross-site scripting is a common security vulnerability. This is done by injecting malicious scripts into a web page, which is then executed by the victim's web browser. For example, consider a web page that allows users to post comments. An attacker could craft a comment that contains malicious JavaScript code. If the input is not sanitized, this code will execute on every user who opens the comments page. XSS attacks can reveal sensitive information such as login credentials, perform unauthorized actions on behalf of the victim, or even redirect the victim to a malicious website. To prevent XSS attacks, always sanitize user-generated content and validate input data on the server side. Deserialization is the process of converting a stream of bytes back into a data structure that will be used by a program. Insecure deserialization is a vulnerability that occurs when a web app deserializes untrusted data. For example, consider a web application that allows users to upload a file containing serialized Java objects. The web application then deserializes the objects and processes them. An attacker can craft a malicious file which, when deserialized, will execute arbitrary code. This can allow an attacker to perform various types of attacks such as remote code execution, privilege escalation, and data theft. To prevent insecure deserialization attacks, it is important to validate all inputs. Additionally, limit the amount of code that runs with high privileges and ensure that all sensitive data is encrypted. When you plan to use a piece of software, always check for known vulnerabilities. There are many public databases like ExploitDB, which contains publicly disclosed vulnerabilities for various software and applications. Failing to do this can leave the system open to attacks, as attackers can exploit these vulnerabilities to gain access to sensitive information. For example, an application may use a third-party library to handle file uploads, but the library might have a known vulnerability. If the application uses the vulnerable library, it is open to attack, even if the rest of the application is secure. Make sure you do your research before using any third-party software for your business. To summarize, OWASP Top 10 Vulnerabilities is a vital checklist that we can use to keep our web applications and software secure. As a pen tester or a bug bounty hunter, you should be aware of these vulnerabilities to stay ahead of attackers. Always sanitize user input, employ logging, and do your research before using any third-party software. Hope you found this video useful. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. See you soon with another topic.